This is obviously a big album that most of you are probably curious to how I feel about it. Behemoth, I Loved You at Your Darkest, which, if you go down to one of the tracks off of this very release, ROM 5.8, is an impression or an interpretation of the verse right there, where essentially the verse is supposed to say that God loved you during your darkest hour and brought you back into the light. Behemoth has been a band that over the past couple of years and couple of albums has certainly come into the light whenever it comes to heavy metal fans. They were always very highly respected, but over the course of the past decade, their popularity has certainly risen. And with an album such as The Satanist preceding this, they had very heavy shoes to fill. Very large feet, hopefully, are going to be in these shoes. And this album is meant to be the follow-up, basically them attempting to replicate the impossible. But did they exactly do that? No, they really didn't. Instead, Behemoth decided to do something a little different. They didn't necessarily dive back into their roots as a more traditional black metal band during the first portion of their career, but the attitude and the overall timbre of this album definitely envisions a little bit more darkness, and there are a little bit more of a theatrical approach being utilized within this disc as well. So how does this darkness really begin? It begins with the intro Solve going into Wolves of Siberia. These are two tracks that honestly, whenever you consider the Satanist's tone or the tone of recent albums by Behemoth, does immediately give you a lot more gray and a lot more black than perhaps the production pop that you got from the albums that preceded it. This feels a little bit more rugged. There's a little bit more speed that's involved here. These are shorter tracks. A duo of shorter tracks to start off an album, and it starts it off on a furious pace. Now, God Equals Dog, quite honestly, kinda hokey. From the title alone, and then going into the track itself, it's really kind of cringy in a little bit of a way, but whenever you see how it works, whenever it comes to the track listing, not too bad. And really, whenever you get into the next couple of tracks, you're getting into a few that really come across as early highlights. And the one that certainly is popping out to me is Bartzabel. This is, I guess, the third single off of this album that they decided to drop. It's a 5-minute long track, a lot of chanting in here. This is one where the theatrics are certainly in high gear, but it works really, really well. I love the way in which this track is built. It has a little bit more of that old school black metal approach, though it has that melodic side. They kind of combine both worlds in order to deliver a track that has a lot of feel to it and is extremely catchy. And saying the word catchy is immediately going to be a turn-off to a lot of people. It's going to be like, oh, they wrote a catchy song? Well, that song sucks. No, it doesn't. Listen to the track. You'll know exactly what I mean. It's something where by the end of it, you want to sort of sing along with the choruses that you hear in the background. You want to become part of this sort of unholy, matrimonious, congregation. So you want to be a part of that. And you get into a very nice middle portion of this disc that once again reverts back to some of these shorter tracks. This is not an album that has too many cuts that go above the 6-minute mark. And in fact, there's only one song that does that. Bartzabel at 5 minutes and 1 second is, quite honestly, I think the second longest track on this album. So obviously, using that shorter approach certainly has helped. And that speed and sort of that utilization of tone and sort of that black raw ability intermixing with there's a lot going on here. There's definitely a lot that's going on here, and I think that it's getting a little bit more flack than it really deserves. I can't say this really because it's just Jehovah backwards, so I'll just say it. Jehovah backwards Pantocrator is the second highlight of this disc. It is the late album highlight of I Loved You at Your Darkest. Now, again, similar to God Equals Dog, I have to be completely and totally honest with you. I find the concept of this lyrically to be a little bit hokey because there have been plenty of bands out there that have done plays on the Dark Lord's Prayer. They have done plenty of plays on the Adversary's Hymn or the Adversary's Prayer, whatever the term that you may use with your denomination of evil cult. But that's kind of what you're getting with this. You're getting an interpretation of really the inverted Lord's Prayer, and the funny thing about it is that it works. It works. Typically, whenever I hear stuff like this or see stuff like this, I'm immediately kind of, not so much turned off, but I want context. And there have been a couple of bands that have been able to utilize prayers or different elements of the satanic library quite well. Celtic Frost being one of them on Monotheist, on the song Synagogue Satanae. That's a really good way, because that's based off of an old writing. There's a portion in there that's based off of an old writing as well, and we've seen that utilized by other groups as well in the past. So whenever I started hearing that, I'm thinking, oh no, they have this great, backbone to this track, great music that's flowing, and this is what we're going to get, but it works so very well. And there's enough of sort of a distance from legitimacy and what Nurgle and the boys have been able to craft that it gives it an extra special taste and an extra special tone. It's a nice punch right into overdrive, and it's 6 minutes that honestly go on. They don't overstay their welcome. In fact, you wished it was a little bit longer. So overall, this album has a lot of great things going for it. It has a lot of terrific ideas, and they're utilized quite nicely. The blend that Behemoth is able to give us on this disc feels very passionate, and so this album doesn't feel that much like a Satanist letdown. For those who are expecting the Satanist Part 2, you will be let down because your expectations were set to the moon or set to the sun. This, however, is an album that is not without a couple of flaws, and that's the fact that some of these tracks, they kind of end very abruptly. That might seem like a really hokey or small thing to argue about, but I feel like with the way in which these tracks are being presented musically in the background, with that sort of gray and that dark that you're getting from some of the more traditional black metal elements that this album delivers, you could actually extend that outro a little bit and do an extended fade, and it would keep that riff in your mind a little bit longer, kind of use that little hypnosis theory in order to make these tracks stand out and stay a little bit more closely to a listener's ear, and make them perhaps very tempted to go back and listen to a track again based off of those things, or immediately pinpoint that as an absolute highlight. If you notice how very quick I was to label Bartzabel and Backwards Jehovah Pantocrator, it's because they do have these things going for them. I would listen to a Behemoth album that was not 12 tracks, but instead was 6 or 7 tracks, and each of them were 8 minutes long. I think that I would gain a little bit more out of this album if there was a little bit more of that going on, but I still love what they did in many places. Somewhere along the lines of the middle portion of this album, it kind of gets derailed a little bit. It feels very solid, but at the same time feels a little bit jittery. And based off of that, it does kind of dock points off of that. And I'm not as keen on the way in which this album concludes. Of course, the Satanist had the very, very powerful finale, the longest cut on the album, and it immediately left a lasting impression. It's one of their most played songs on a lot of the different streaming platforms, and this does not have that ending to it, so it really ends on a very dour note. For me, at least, this album kind of ends with Backwards Jehovah Pantocrator. It's really the point where the album, I think, has made its mark. ROM 5.8 is good enough, and We Are the Next 1,000 Years is just kind of, it's just kind of there. The album does not really lead you in the best possible way. So where does that put it score-wise? Well, in an age where the Satanists would probably have its score elevated from a couple of years ago, this is one that still doesn't fare off all that badly. It fares off as a 24 out of 30. It's by no means a secondary classic, but it's still an album that I feel shows where Behemoth's hand is right now. It shows where perhaps we can expect future albums to go. But at the same time, we probably thought that about the Satanist, and we got dealt a curveball. So I think what this shows is that Behemoth is just fine. Nurgle is certainly exploring some different possibilities, and I don't think that we have any risk anytime soon of this band going soft. It definitely seems like, thematically speaking, they only want to go deeper and deeper into the, dark atrocities of the Antichrist, as well as the Satanist literature, and really continue to have their polarizing view on religion get known, their scintillating views on evil be displayed. So I think that we can say that with a 24 out of 30 that the band is still doing just fine, and it's certainly an album that if you're a Behemoth fan you will probably enjoy. But I want to know that. I want to know whether or not you enjoyed this album. I want to know if you thought I loved you at your darkest. was the dark slab of Behemoth that you were indeed looking for here in 2018? Let me know that in the comments below. My name is coverkillernation, and hey, there's a link in the description box right down there below. It's going to take you to a CD sale that's going on right now. It's got about 100 titles left. That's right, I'm selling off part of my personal collection. It's crazy, right? There's some metal that's still available, some alternative rock if you're into that sort of stuff, even some rap. I know. Weird, right? But yeah, there's going to be a link down there in the description box for you to check it out. If you want to get any of the albums that are listed there, hit me up on one of the Cover Killer Nation social media sites that you're about to see after I say this. I will talk to you next time. Good night. Use social media.